Will Penn State's new wide receivers help fix a problem of Penn State's that's been nagging them for 2 years? That problem being Drew Allar, phenomenal talent, has improved every year, and I think especially in year 2 of Andy Krolnicki's system, you will see further improvements. But in the biggest games, whether against Ohio State and Michigan in 2023, or against Ohio State, even Illinois, Oregon, and in the playoffs in 2024, he just doesn't play at the same level. Now, to be fair, in part that's expected because you're playing tougher competition. But Allar has never passed for greater than a 140 passer rating in big games, even against Illinois, who last year had a good team, an above average team, but not a great team, not an elite team, not anything close to an elite team. I mean, if Penn State had a kicker in that game, if they started Ryan Barker at kicker in that game, they would have won by 3 scores instead of 2, and the game would have been viewed as over well before the final few minutes of the fourth quarter, when it actually was clear that Penn State was going to win. That's a good question right there, whether or not new wide receivers can help Allar take that step forward, because receiver has been an issue at Penn State, but Allar's also had games where he's inaccurate, very inconsistent, and just does not look like the 5-star tabbed as a future first-round quarterback that many said he was out of high school. So looking at this new wide receiver core that Penn State has, they brought in Trebor Pena, they brought in Devonte Ross, and Kyron Hudson from Syracuse, Troy, and USC, respectively. They lost Harrison Wallace to the portal to Ole Miss, and they lost Omari Evans to Washington. I think they definitely upgraded there. And there's a redshirt freshman in Tyseer Denmark who was recruited highly out of high school, had an Ohio State offer, for example. He will probably be in the rotation as well. This is certainly a deeper wide receiver room, and a wide receiver room with much higher upside than Penn State had last year, where against Notre Dame, they didn't have a single completed pass to a wide receiver of more than 0 yards. They did not have a positive reception to a wide receiver. I think Harrison Wallace technically had a reception, but it was for negative yardage per the stat sheet, per the box score of ESPN for that Orange Bowl. That in that game, I will tell you, if Penn State had Carnell Tate, and not Carnell Tate of this season, who's expected to be a first-round talent, but Carnell Tate of last season, who was near elite, potentially elite, but who wasn't Jeremiah Smith and wasn't Emeka Egbuka. Those were clearly the 2 best Ohio State wide receivers. If they have Carnell Tate, I'll go even further and say if they had Brandon Inniss, or if they had true freshman Mylan Graham, who wasn't even on campus for a full year, they probably beat Notre Dame. Probably. They probably, if I'm being honest, they may have beaten Ohio State. If they had Carnell Tate in the regular season, they absolutely beat Ohio State. I mean, Penn State's wide receivers in that game were running into each other. They clearly didn't know what was going on. And that fade in the end zone, which Davison Igbinosun made an incredible interception off of, that was a perfectly thrown ball. Harrison Wallace should have caught that. And if Tate was wide receiver 1 instead of Wallace, they catch that. And Penn State enters halftime with a lead. And you know what? They probably win that game. Or at least it's a game in the final seconds. And maybe Ohio State has to kick a game-winning field goal, or Penn State kicks the game-winning field goal. It was the ultimate handicap of the 2024 Penn State roster, which I thought at moments last year looked like the best roster in America. At the end of the day, that was Ohio State. And I think Texas had a better roster too. But with Abdul Carter, with Tyler Warren, with Kobe King, Zane Durant, with an offensive line that led Penn State to be top 20 in yards per carry, with a respectively tough schedule, and with no wide receivers to help them. So teams stacked the box against Penn State. Sometimes didn't matter. They still ran it very well. They had so many good players and a really good coaching staff. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough. They should have been in that national championship game. They should have won the Big Ten. The power ratings at the end of the year said, at least per FPI, S&P Plus says that Oregon was better than Penn State, but FPI said at the end of the year that Penn State was the superior team to Oregon in power ratings. And you know what? Honestly, given the Rose Bowl outcome, I think that makes some sense. So adding a receiver in Pena that had nearly 1,000 yards last year, had 84 receptions and 9 touchdowns, is big. He played in a pass-heavy system, yes, but it's not like Syracuse had all the talent in the world either. And entering 2024, or maybe it was in 2023, he was on some freaks lists, and he was an all-ACC player last year. Kyle McCord's one of his best receivers. I know that Syracuse had another wide receiver who went to the NFL. Name sadly escapes me. They had a lot of good wide receivers, and their wide receivers coach is now the wide receivers coach at Oregon, which shows how highly thought of he is in, top college football circles. They didn't just add Pena, though, and they paid good money to get Pena, 7 figures, I believe, or at least I speculate. Devonte Ross was added in the winter window from Troy, 76 receptions, 1,043 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns, 13.7 yards per reception. He torched Iowa's defense and also had a touchdown return, a punt return for a touchdown on special teams. So definitely someone who can compete with some of the better defensive athletes in the Big Ten. Shorter guy, but fast, speedy guy. I really like what he brings to Penn State. And then they got Kyron Hudson in the portal, who's more of a big possession wide receiver. Made that awesome one-handed catch against LSU. Now, LSU didn't have the best defense in the world. It was still a really impressive catch on a throw that wasn't really good and that was risky. And most other quarterbacks either wouldn't have made, and if they did, most receivers in college football certainly wouldn't have caught that ball. Hudson had 38 receptions for 462 yards, 3 touchdowns, and averaged 12.2 yards per reception. What we have heard, and I've heard this from Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast, I've heard it from looking at different websites and articles and what other analysts besides myself think. Everyone likes the USC wide receivers they got in the portal. Georgia's going to start Zachariah Branch. Florida State's going to start Deuce Robinson. They like them. And Penn State likes Kyron Hudson, and they're going to start him. And USC's receivers they retained, Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, were the best of the bunch last year. These are not bad receivers, the USC backups last year, even though they, didn't break records or all get 1,000 receiving yards, and Kyron Hudson didn't even get 500, only got 3 receiving touchdowns. They left because they wanted more playing time. And they also left, I think, because Penn State and Florida State and Georgia needed receivers. They needed desperately upgrades at receivers. They were willing to pay good money. And I think USC may also have some players that we just don't know about yet in that receiver ready to emerge. We're talking about Penn State here, though. I think that to a certain degree, to answer your question here, this question, by the way, was asked by Drew Allar season. Good Twitter account, and he's also a member of our Discord server. Speaking of which, check the link in the description. The Discord server link, it's named, it's obvious, you can see it if you read carefully. And join that and type in a question that you have in our hashtag YouTube mailbox channel. And like Drew Allar season, you can ask me a question and I will make a video out of it. To answer your question, will Penn State's new wide receivers help Allar step up in big games? To a point, they absolutely will. Because Allar has made some nice throws. Against USC and Oregon, he made some beautiful throws. He made one beautiful throw even against Ohio State. It was where Tyler Warren was matched up against Lathan Ransom. Warren won the one-on-one. Didn't make too many good throws in that game, but he made one there. You see the potential with Allar, and if he did have better weapons, I think that would help him out a lot. But also, to a certain degree, it's on him to step up in big games. You can't have those weird throws off platform, or where the mechanics break down, or where he's under duress and it clearly affects how he throws. And by clearly affects, I mean affects him more than it does other top-tier quarterbacks when they're under pressure. Will Howard at Ohio State, for example, I think did a much better job with accuracy and pocket awareness and staying strong and keeping his mechanics up to standard. And he's not as talented of a quarterback as Allar is. Allar has way more NFL potential. And certainly if Howard had Allar's supporting cast, he wouldn't have been as good as he was at Ohio State. That's for sure. However, Howard played to his ceiling. Howard was gutsy. Howard did what the staff asked him to do. He operated in the system rather well. To a certain degree, I don't know if Allar has done that at Penn State entirely or not. The Notre Dame game, for example, was bad. It was bad. Now, Notre Dame had one of the better secondaries in football last year, but it wasn't an elite secondary. And Ohio State and USC proved that. Any, and I mean this, any passing offense that had capable receivers blew that secondary to shreds. Any of them. I mean, Indiana, and Indiana's very talent limited. Indiana did a better job against Ohio State's offense than Notre Dame did. Way better of a job. Now, part of that was because Ohio State's offensive line dealt with, the Seth McLaughlin injury a few days before the Indiana game. But also, I think Indiana's defense was up there with Notre Dame's, worse talent-wise, but I think in some cases better in other areas, particularly the run defense and the defensive line. So talent in that example, it means a lot, but it's also not everything. That's why Indiana went 11-2 last year and blew out everyone who had similar or inferior talent to them. It's also why, for example, just to mention something, it's why Michigan's done very well in the defensive line. They haven't recruited above 40% of their defensive line being blue chip players in recent memory, and yet they have first rounders, or at least, day 3 NFL picks all the time on that D-line because they develop well there. So with Allar and the wide receivers, to a certain degree, it's a lack of talent, recruiting-wise, or even from Allar's perspective, just talent in general to help him out. But also it's on Allar to make sure he does everything he can to improve. And as for the wide receivers, I think they're going to help for sure. I think this year against Oregon and against Ohio State, Allar will perform better against those teams to a much, much better degree than he did last year, but I don't know that for sure. And Allar last year was gutsier, made better decisions, and was also more aggressive than he was the year prior. Some of those turned into risky throws and bad interceptions. So he needs to continue to make progress as well. He's far from a complete quarterback at this point, but a complete quarterback for him is round 1, pick 1 potential. So that's my answer to your question. I think the wide receivers for Penn State will be not just a good unit this year, I think they'll be a great unit this year. I think this is a great wide receiver room that will give most secondaries, if not all secondaries they play, some problems. It's not Ohio State caliber, but no one's wide receiver room is Ohio State's caliber. And with what Penn State has at quarterback in Allar, and also the offensive line, which had some struggles in pass blocking last year, but they bring everyone back, have a lot of tight ends, very deep, talented tight end room, I think that Allar's entire supporting cast will improve. And on top of being in Kotelnicki's system for a second year, I think that'll help him take a step forward as well.